I just asked to see the case file to sort of see what was going on there, and I didn't hear anything. My public records request was, you know, just in the ether for a while, and then I got a records request denial, which I'm used to getting those. Like, we're all used to getting those kinds of things, but it was denied because they reopened the investigation into this St. Albans police officer, which immediately, right, like my light bulb went off in my head. Something was going on.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Today's discussion is supported in part by the Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, which is supporting our First Amendment and Free Press program, where we bring journalists into the community, or in this case, online, to discuss their work and their role in our democracy. Today, I'm joined by Liam Elder-Connors from Vermont Public Radio. Liam, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.
Liam was a fellow at our New England First Amendment Institute last year, which we'll be holding again this fall. Applications due out next week. Liam, any words for those that are considering applying and joining the program this year?
Oh, you should definitely do it. It was such a great experience to meet other New England journalists. I hadn't really had that before, to meet folks from other states and sort of all share wisdom about doing journalism in this region, and made some really good friends. So you learn a lot. So definitely do it. Apply for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate the endorsement. Again, applications due out next week. Now, Liam, I invited you on to talk about your work with public records, the recent reporting that you've been doing. And earlier today, I went onto your Twitter feed to look for a specific link to a story that you reported. And I came across this photo of you looking kind of like Mad Max on some Twitter feed called NPRmageddon. And as soon as I saw it, I'm thinking, okay, there's a better story behind this than anything else we're going to talk about today. What is going on here?
I wish I could say that I made that, but that's actually it's sort of like a rite of passage in like this public media world. This is just like this Twitter account that they will go and find public radio reporters and journalists all over the country, and they make them like Mad Max style characters. And so I got the great honor a few years ago of becoming one of those apocalyptic warriors. So it's always like, among the public radio sphere, we're always very excited when we get chosen at random to be on NPRmageddon. So that's not what I normally wear. I'm not normally like clad in leather and with machetes all over the place, but sometimes.
Well, I was going to ask you if you had any input into the weaponry and imagery that was used, or whether you just woke up one morning and there you were.
I woke up one morning and I had a bunch of Twitter notifications. So it was, I think they do try to like look into your face and pick the right outfit. So I think they did a pretty good job with me.
So Liam, I invited you on today to talk about a very interesting public records story that involves the Attorney General in Vermont. Maybe you could go back to 2018 when I believe it started. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at the St. Albans Police Department then, and where your reporting began, and bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty interesting. I mean, in 2018, there was an incident at the St. Albans police station where a now former officer, Joel Dolgray, pepper sprayed an 18-year-old teenager in the face while he was like detained in a holding cell. That's what this affidavit that just came out this week alleges. And so, well, it's kind of interesting you mentioned, going back to 2018, like no one knew that this happened in 2018. Like this incident didn't come out until I started kind of asking about it. And the reason why I even knew about it was because I was just doing some follow-up reporting on a very similar incident that happened in the St. Albans Police Department last year, where another officer was caught on his body camera footage. The footage showed him punching a handcuffed woman in the face who was in a holding cell at the department. So when that incident happened, I mean, that was like a huge story here in Vermont, and the Attorney General ended up filing simple assault charges against that officer. And so, being a reporter, I was interested in looking more into what other cases, was this the first time the Attorney General had brought any charges against officers for excessive force? And so I just asked for a list of all the cases that they had looked at, and got a list of about a dozen or so. And I knew most of them just because these are things that tend to come out in the news. But there was two that I didn't know about, including this one from 2018, I'd never heard of it before. No one had reported it. And so I just asked to see the case file to sort of see what was going on there. And I didn't hear anything. My public records request was, you know, just in the ether for a while. And then I got a records request denial, which I'm used to getting those. Like we're all used to getting those kinds of things, but it was denied because they reopened the investigation into this St. Albans police officer, which immediately, right, like my light bulb went off in my head. Something was going on.
Let me take a step back. For
Sure.
those that are watching this and aren't working in newsrooms, maybe you can tell us exactly like what a public records request is, because I have conversations oftentimes with journalists like yourself that talk about the public records process. And I'm looking to demystify the process because it's actually a very simple one, right? Like what does it take to request these records and do the work that you're doing?
You know, I think it's a really good point to make because like it's not like a journalism superpower that any of us here have. Like this is something that every citizen has the right to ask their government, to ask municipal bodies for records that are created in the course of that government agency's work. So, your town's, financial records, like things that are created by city halls, like you should be able to go in there and look at things that are created by public officials. And, police departments, as we've been hearing a lot about, are a huge portion of what we're spending taxpayer dollars on right now. And so people can just ask for records related to things that police are doing. And the process of doing that is pretty simple. I mean, you can send an email to police departments. They usually have like a records person you can ask. I mean, it's also nice to I have a form that I use. I'm always happy to send people that form if they're interested in the state of Vermont. If they want some help with a public records request, I just send them this form, this template that I have that I use that just sort of lays out the statute in Vermont law that allows you to access public records. I mean, that's a little overboard. You don't necessarily need to cite the statute. Like government workers should know the public records laws, but it's nice to just sort of have that if you're kind of new to this sort of thing.
So you use the public records law as a tool to ask for these records.
Mm-hmm.
Some go to 2018, and you see that there was an incident involving this police officer, but you're denied the records because now, a couple years later, the investigation has been reopened. What are you thinking? What's going through your head as a reporter? What's the story here that you're trying to find out?
I mean, first of all, I want to know what that incident is. I mean, that's the first thing. I'm like, what is going on that now 2 years after you said you weren't going to bring charges against this officer, what is different now 2 years later? Why did you reopen this? And what I was told at the time was that when they were preparing to release the records to me, they discovered some new information about the case, which, you kind of are like, what is that exactly? Like what's going on there? And it took a little bit of negotiating and sort of like I had to kind of play my cards right to sort of to get a little bit of that information because they didn't the AG's office was not willing to release a ton of information because they said they'd reopened this investigation. So they were citing exemption rules, which said they could hold back these records because it was still an active criminal investigation. But I was able to at least find out that this incident was remarkably similar to the incident that had just been reported about where the St. Albans officer punched a handcuffed woman. I was able to find out it was a St. Albans police officer, extraordinarily similar events. And in one case, this one in 2019 with the woman who was punched, that resulted in a criminal charge. And this one that had happened almost a year before and no one had talked about it, that hadn't. And now they were reinvestigating that because I had asked about it and some new information came out. So that was kind of all I was able to get initially with this records request, which is just so unusual. I've never had a denial before because they were reopening an investigation. It was very strange.
That's interesting. I speak to a lot of journalism students throughout the year, and some of the advice I give them is just ask questions, ask for records, shake things up, just see what happens, see what kind of response you get. And this is the first time I've ever heard of a response being, because of your public records request, we have now found more information to reopen this investigation. Has the attorney general has he given any indication as to why this officer wasn't prosecuted a couple of years ago?
So that is actually just kind of come out, or the explanation has come out a little bit this week. So um, earlier this week, this officer was charged with with assault. He's pled not guilty. So what the attorney general has said, the new information was when they were getting ready to give me the records, they kind of were going back through and making some calls, and they called a use of force expert who they had gotten to consult on the case initially. And the attorney general says that the use of force expert, his opinion was not as clear as he remembered it being back 2 years ago. So it's like I'm still trying to like piece it out because there's a lot of it's a little like in the weeds. It's a little confusing. It's not quite clear what exactly went on. I really still need to see the file. I want to see the file of this to sort of understand what happened in 2017 and what happened in 2020. But
Mhm.
the new information the attorney general in Vermont is saying was that he called up this old use of force expert who had a different opinion that said the use of force was he couldn't decide if that was justified or not. And so the attorney general said, well, it's more unclear than I remembered. I've always been troubled by this case because it was so troubling and unsettling. So I'm just going to get another use of force expert to render an opinion. And so that opinion was that the force was unreasonable. And that's why there are now charges against this officer. If that makes
Accountability,
sense.
which
It's a little
is
convoluted.
looking for. Looking for accountability within law enforcement, which might come just as a matter of asking for records, and something that we encourage everyone to do to learn more about their law enforcement and how police officers are handling cases and those that they arrest. In this case, maybe you can tell us as a reporter who covers crime within communities in Vermont. What can citizens, journalists and non-journalists alike, what can we all do to really push for more transparency within law enforcement, particularly as we're having this national conversation now about police reform? Are there certain things that we can all do to make sure that police are acting in the public interest, and when they're not, the most appropriate response is taken?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to a lot of using some of the public records laws, but also just being able to ask questions of your local agencies. I think things to sort of think about is you could just ask like some pretty basic questions to start off with, like, does your local police department have body cameras? And if they have body cameras, what are the policies around the release of that footage? Do they publish online citizen complaints? Is that something that you could get? Could you ask for citizen complaints? Those are public records. You should be able to ask for those. Do they publish what uses of force happen every year? I mean, do they have a tally of how many times they pepper spray people, use their tasers, draw their tasers, use their firearms? These are all things that departments keep track of or should be keeping track of. And you, as a citizen, as a journalist, should be able to ask and get that information. And I think what I've really learned with this story that we're talking about right now is that, like, I didn't go into it knowing I was going to find an officer who pepper sprayed somebody, and I didn't think was going to cause an investigation to be reopened. But I saw I was interested in knowing this one thing, which was, have the attorney general charged any other officers, and what are the kind of cases that are being referred to the attorney general's office to review for potential, you know, excessive force. And when I saw that list and there was one I didn't know about, I asked about it because I was curious, and it happened in St. Albans where this other brutality alleged incident happened, and it ended up being a new investigation. So you don't have to know what you're looking for, but you can just sort of follow your gut when you see things that you're curious about, is kind of how I think about it. Or like if a little like flag goes off in your head that you're like, that's a little weird, like what's going on there? Ask the question, make that records request, and you'll find some interesting things often.
For sure. Now, are there specific things that you would like to see as far as reforms are concerned that would make police departments more transparent? So, for example, we at NEFAC sent a letter to the Vermont to Vermont lawmakers, saying, here's a list of things that we think you should consider as far as changing policies or even laws to make sure there's more accountability within law enforcement agencies, like simple things, even like just mandating the use of body cameras, right? And making sure that the public has access to them. As a reporter, what would make your life easier as far as getting the information you need to keep us all informed about what our police are doing?
Well, I think body cameras is like a very good example of like something that would be great to have across the state. But then, having the body cameras is only half of the equation. It also that footage has to be accessible to the public as well. It can't just be something that is used in departments. I mean, I've certainly had difficulty getting access to body camera footage, whether because sometimes there'll be exemptions that it's an investigation that's ongoing, or costs occasionally can be prohibitive in getting access to those records. So like greater degrees of transparency and willingness to release things like that. But I think there are a lot of other areas that I'm interested in looking at, and I think that are being talked about in the state, which are, this. I keep going back to this story about this that I've been writing about, but there's not a clear system for who, what prosecutors review excessive cases of excessive force in police officers. There's not a place where I can go and sort of see a list of how many officers in the state have been investigated over the course of the year or have had cases reviewed to the attorney general or a county prosecutor. So even something like that just sort of gave the public a list of, here are all the incidents that have been reviewed, like that are related to law enforcement that have been referred to prosecutors, and sort of here's a little bit about them. I think that would go a really long way in just increasing transparency, so people could sort of know what's going on in their department, and if there's like one department that potentially has a larger issue than just like one or two officers.
Definitely. That transparency is so crucial. And hopefully at this point, we have some momentum to see some of those changes. And in the meantime, reporting like yours continues to push us forward in the right direction. So many thanks for all you do. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Anytime. Thanks, Justin.